Hello, America. This is Call of Duty Goddess. Today is February 16th, 2016. I thought I'd check the radio station that usually interviews Lory Storm, and I thought I'd check the KSDZ and KDJL website and see if they'd heard anything from Lory Storm here, and looks like I missed an interview, so I thought I would share that with you. So I'm at the website, I'm going to free speech, and I'm going to go down to Jim, Lory, and Brianna interview.
Well, Twister listeners, Jim Lamley with you here this morning, along with Lory Storm on the airwaves, reporting. And listeners, on my way to work this morning, on my way into the studio, I was listening to my radio station, the Twister. And I was very delighted, to be very honest with you. Mitch was playing a tune for you this morning, the Star-Spangled Banner. I'm sure that many of you heard that particular song and have heard it time and time again. But it's quite frightening to me, ladies and gentlemen, all of a sudden, if you fly the colors in these United States of America, the federal government is pointing their weapon at you. Hard to comprehend. I honestly don't. Good morning, Lory. How are you?
Good morning.
It's nice to have you stop by to do a little reporting for us this morning, Lory. And this may, listeners, we're just going to give you the heads up. We have a busy log, and there's an awful lot of bases to get covered here this morning. This may go on for a couple of hours. We don't honestly know. Lory, let's, obviously there were some dramatic developments yesterday. You probably have your own take on that. I have my take on it. I listened to that guy rant and rave for a couple of hours, and I'm going, what a crock-a-malarkey. From 1 minute, it's give me liberty or give me death. And I've got a gun to my head. And the next thing you know, he says, just holler out hallelujah, and I'll walk out the door. And it's like, what kind of a fake plant are you, mister? Now, that's my take on the guy. I could be just totally off base here, but
No,
the guy was a loose cannon.
I think I told you a while ago that of the four occupiers who were left, David Fry and his cohorts were not hardcore militia. David's been more heartbroken about the failure of the legalization of marijuana in his state than he has most anything else.
Yeah, I almost quit listening at that point. It's like, this guy's off the wall.
War of the Worlds.
And there you go.
Yeah, but there was there was a point to his lunacy, and there was a reason that once these four non-militant, non-militia were left out there all by themselves, that the escalation of the military ops just started ramping up dramatically. Black Hawk helicopters and MRAPs by the dozens coming into that little place, and I think they got exactly what they wanted in the end. They might have missed a few of the militia commander leaders that they thought might show up, but by God, they got Clive and Bundy.
Well, it appears to me, and I don't know that I'm right, this is just my opinion, and please, and I really haven't prefaced our conversation here, Lory. This is a public affairs presentation of KSDZ and KDJL radio. You're going to hear facts here this morning, ladies and gentlemen, and you will also hear some opinions. You draw your own conclusions. We just want you to open your eyes and think a little bit, because the Stars and Stripes, the bottom line is the Stars and Stripes are under attack in this country, and it is from within, and it's not the people, the patriots, the citizens, the constitutionalists. It's the federal government. With that being said, Lory, I interrupted your train of thought and screwed up my own, too.
Well, gosh, we want to preface everything so that the FCC doesn't come in here with a SWAT team, because I think they have one, too.
I'm sure they do.
Maybe three.
You know, I've had a nice relationship with them through the years, and I really don't want to mess it up. But free speech, to my knowledge, still is available to us. Now, there's a hammer coming down on that, too.
Yeah, I think you could be wrong about that. The arrest of Pete Santilli pretty much tells us how much free speech is still welcomed in this country. Don't get me wrong, Pete's not one of my favorite people, but I listened to all his tapes from the compound, and the man has done nothing wrong.
Right.
He did ask for people to come and stand with them. He never mentioned to come and stand with their arms.
Right.
And so far as I know, peaceful protesting or assembly is one of the rights granted us by the First Amendment. Occupy Wall Street certainly didn't seem to have a problem.
You know, the only thing yesterday that I heard that I absolutely had to agree with, and I'm going to paraphrase here just a little bit because I was thinking about this last night, to be honest with you, and I finally jotted it down. And now if I can read my own writing, but The one woman that was on there, one of the women, I should say, she made the comment. She said, when Congress doesn't follow the Constitution, congressmen call it compromise. When American citizens do follow the Constitution, our Congress, our president, our government calls us terrorists. Why is that?
Well, because
She had an excellent point.
people standing for the Constitution in this country are standing against what the military, well, not the military, but the militarized police departments in this country have become.
Right.
You remember Obama said, I will have a standing army in this country as large as the military. And by gosh, I don't know where he got it or where they came from, but he has it, and I've seen it up close and personal in Burns, Oregon.
Well, when I look at what happened in Burns, Oregon, when I looked at the amount of hardware, the number of personnel that were there, and I say to myself, we go into a war zone, we go into Syria, we go into Iraq, we go into wherever, and send in some kind of a special ops team with plain and simple the desire to go eliminate a group of people, the bad guys, if you will, and they send in 10 or 15 people. And I have no idea how many they had in Burns, but they had enough to fight a small war there. Black Hawk helicopters, I mean, the list goes on.
Well, I think they easily had between 300 and 500 people, and those were the ones that were visible. Easily.
Kidding me.
No. And they had tents set up all over the Burns airport. They had basically commandeered the entire airport. And as this thing went on, it just became bigger. Black Hawk helicopters, Ryder trucks full of electronic communications equipment being brought in and set up in containers and large trailers with satellites. You would have thought...
And thanks to the green movement, they had recycled paper there for toilet paper.
Thank God.
Yes.
I know. We're in the holy grail of the environmental movement in Portland, Oregon, okay?
I shouldn't have said that, but it's just, I look at the whole thing and it is so stupid to me.
No, you would have thought the Russian army, you would have thought Red Dawn had taken place outside the windows of the Burns High School and the Russian paratroopers had dropped in. That's exactly what it looked like in Burns, Oregon. They had ranchers out of their trucks on their knees at gunpoint while they fished around for ID to make sure they were going down that road to feed their cattle and not join the militia.
And since when did we start stopping the average American citizen driving down the road? I mean, this has become, I guess you already said it, this is Stalin.
Well, I don't know how you would feel any different in a communist country right now. This was a papers, please checkpoint.
Well, listeners, we're going to go on here this morning, but I want you to understand what we will discuss here this morning and some of the different topics that are going to come up, just so you know, right here in Nebraska and in South Dakota. I'm not going to tell you that it's coming because it's already here. Just get in the canoe and go down the Niobrara River in Cherry County and watch the boys with their automatic shotguns and their automatic rifles, carrying 1,000 rounds of ammunition in their little canoe with them and a red light on the front of it. Okay, Barney.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it's here right now. The BLM, the refuge, take a look at Valentine, even last year, south of Valentine. There was a lady that basically was burnt out, thanks to the BLM, if you will. They want to buy her land, and she didn't want to sell.
Well,
so they start a fire, and it gets away from them. Imagine that.
And they weren't fined $400,000 or thrown in jail like the Hammonds.
No. Okay, we're going to take a break, folks. We have a busy log. We'll be back in a minute, and we're going to kind of start with this deal at the beginning. And, Lory, we're going to run our way through it. Time's going to be limited here, but we're going to go on until we get done. So stay with us, listeners. Lory, I'd like to have you just kind of start at the beginning of this whole situation in Oregon. Take us through this. Now, a person could spend hours talking about this, but do a little summarizing and get us up to speed, if you would, please.
Well, if you remember, this started with Ammon Bundy going down to or up to Oregon to support the Hammonds.
Uh-huh.
Ranchers who had been just completely abused by the federal government and the federal process, charged as terrorists for starting a backfire to stop a BLM berm from destroying their ranch, which was successful, by the way. However, it did burn 136 acres of BLM property. For that, they became terrorists, were charged, went through the trial. The judge said that sentencing them to one more day would have been a violation of the Eighth Amendment, which guarantees us no cruel and unusual punishment. and they went home thinking that this was over. Years later, literally years later, a federal prosecutor decides they haven't served enough time, which was government code for saying you haven't lost your ranch yet, despite the enormous costs we've heaped upon you. Appealed to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, who of course threw them back in jail for the balance of the mandatory sentence of 5 years because they were charged as terrorists. So now both the father and the son are in a federal prison 1,200 miles away from home, and whether or not the family keeps the ranch is up in the air. The other thing the BLM did during this trial was force the Hammond family to sign a first right of refusal to the BLM, just in case they should lose the ranch.
Oh, they're such sneaky son of a guns.
Yeah, in courts of law all over this country, we call that extortion.
Right.
Unless the federal government does it.
Right.
To terrorists, by the way.
Yep.
So they've already torn apart this family. There's a 50-50 chance they'll end up with that ranch and attach it to the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge there in Burns, Oregon. And that there is terrorism in Burns, definitely going on, but it's coming from the BLM, not the people.
Right.
The people are being terrorized on a daily basis. You saw several neighborhood ranchers show up at the beginning protest talking about having the same treatment from the BLM, fires being started, cattle being killed by the fires, nothing they can do, no recourse for these ranchers. So, when Ammon and that crew decided to camp out at the wildlife refuge and try and make a point that, first of all, the federal government has absolutely no authority to control state land, and second of all, in so doing, in controlling that state land, they were terrorizing the neighbors and trying to eradicate the ranchers from surrounding the Malheur Refuge and maybe in Harney County altogether. So once he did that, he found that several ranchers started coming out to visit and telling them stories about what they had endured with the BLM. And none of it was much prettier than what the Hammonds had endured.
Right.
They were getting a lot of sympathy, and they were getting a lot of agreement, and they were educating a lot of people. They were having town hall meetings. Many of these people were staying in town at hotels, including Mr. Santilli. They were eating in town at restaurants. They had no problem whatsoever with the local personnel. You saw one of the news stories where one of the BLM employees paraded out her 12-year-old or 11-year-old daughter to tell everyone how horrified she was.
Right.
What she should have been horrified of was her mother and the way they act.
Right.
But that notwithstanding, it was clear that the militia people were having no problems in town. So at that point, the local FBI, Mercs, whoever they are, decided they needed to change that. So they began harassing people in town.
Right.
Under the name of the militia. And going to the armory and cruising the armory. I'm sure everyone heard the story about the Burns fire chief who resigned for that very reason. He caught someone perusing the armory, if you will, and when he pressed them, he eventually found out it was FBI.
Right.
Trying to look like the militia, were scoping out the armory.
Yeah, and those people ought to have been charged with terrorism, but they get off scot-free.
Absolutely. If
Yep.
there was anyone terrorizing the citizens of Burns, Oregon, it was the FBI and the BLM.
Right.
But, they work for the government. They can do whatever they like. And when that was proven that it was the FBI, there was still nothing done about it. The judge told the fire chief to shut his mouth.
Yeah, and this guy's run for hiding now, it appears.
Yeah, well, he was told he was risking his life. And after what happened with Lavoie, I'm sure he believes it.
Right.
That's just the unfortunate truth of our government. They had the town basically on lockdown, and they were terrorizing their own citizens in order to convince them that it was the militia. In one of the bail affidavits that I read when we were in Portland, one of the FBI agents swore out a bail affidavit and claimed that John Ritzheimer and another militiaman went to a Safeway store and identified a BLM employee and pointed her out and started yelling, "She's BLM, she's BLM."
Uh-huh.
Well, the thought of that's ridiculous anyway. Everyone in Burns knows who works for the BLM.
Right.
The BLM's been in town for 50 years.
Right.
So pointing her out would have been of absolutely no good. Plus, the BLM had closed not only the Malheur Refuge, but they had closed their other office 42 miles away because they were so afraid that the terrorists might come over there and bother them. at their desks. So I don't know why anybody would have been in town with a BLM uniform on,
Right.
because they were all on a paid holiday, thanks to the taxpayers.
Sure.
In any case, she claimed that later on they followed her and flashed their lights erratically and threatened to burn her house down, something that there's not one person at that refuge that would have ever done. I know these people personally. So that was completely either made up or it came from the FBI in town that were doing those sorts of things and will not face any repercussion.
When we're moving forward by little jerks here this morning, I guess you can call that a metaphor if you want to, but we're talking about our government, ladies and gentlemen. That's almost a metaphor, too.
Well, it's a metaphor for the armed militarized force that keeps us in line in this country.
Well, it sure seems to be, Lory. Since our time is limited here, before we get to the top of the hour, we have another break, but then next hour we'll have a little more time. Let's move on as we follow a somewhat of a timeline in this whole, I'll call it movement, this whole situation that has occurred in Burns, Oregon.
Well, and I'm not sure where we were, but...
Well, we were done with the point, I think, or we were to the point anyway, to where Bundy is basically coming on the scene.
Right. And they're at the wildlife refuge.
Right.
And what they did, what their goal was to start having meetings, town hall meetings, and letting people know why they believed the federal government should not control that land, teaching them about the Constitution and about the writings of the framers and the founders that really spelled out the fact that one of the very founding principles of this country was private property ownership. If the king couldn't control the property, he couldn't control the wealth and the resources and therefore the people.
Right.
There's also a couple of things in the Constitution regarding the Western quote-unquote territories that existed before the states applied for statehood. It's very specific. There is, first of all, the article in the Constitution that states that the federal government can control 10 square miles, known as Washington, D.C.
Correct.
It can control other places for arsenals, magazines, dockyards, and other needful buildings, is the quote. And it can do so by the permission of the legislature in that state, and then it can pay for it. If the legislature says no, then it has to go somewhere else to find the land for that needful building. There is no building covering 187,000 acres, and there's no building covering 87% of Nevada. The point was, the Equal Footings Clause said that when these states applied for statehood, if Congress approved the boundaries of their state, say the state of Nevada, for instance,
Right.
once those boundaries were approved, Congress relinquished control of that land as soon as that state had elected a legislature and was capable of managing the land on its own. That land became a part of that sovereign state. Unfortunately, later on in this country, as places like Nevada and Wyoming started to become states, the government was already seeing that there was an immense amount of money, power, and resource under the ground in those states. Mining resources, gas resources, oil resources, water resources. Nebraska was very lucky with the Oglala Aquifer that we got into the Union without losing a whole bunch of our land, too. And the government has figured that out as well and is now coming back after the Oglala Aquifer, as you can see.
Yes.
But people were learning this. They were starting to understand that Ammon was right. That if there's going to be open lands and lands for public use, they must be managed by the states, not by the federal government. And if the federal government had wrested land away from private property owners, it needed to go back into the hands that it was in. So you have either private property ownership or state property ownership, just like we have in Nebraska state parks.
Correct.
Most all states do. Most of the land inside that state should be the property of either the private owners it was wrested from or the state. That was the point. And people were picking up that message. They were understanding the message, and it was spreading like wildfire.
Sure.
So Ammon moved his messaging farther outside of the county of Burns, and they went to a couple of meetings south of Harney County. It was when Chris Ann Hall came out to speak and attracted 400 people that the government started to become concerned. And, well, it's a longer story than we have here before the break, but a nefarious phone call and the recording of such phone call led to those occupiers that were traveling up to Harney County or Grant County and John Day were literally lured to at least one of their deaths.
Right.
So, again, that's a longer story than we have before the break.
We have about 8 minutes here before the top of the hour, Lory, and I want to continue on with our timeline, so to speak, as we discuss this situation out in Oregon.
Right. Well, Chris Ann Hall spoke in Harney County, attracted quite a few people, and she was going to go up and speak in Grant County, which is John Day. And they set up that meeting, and they had planned to go up and speak. Victoria Sharp, the one little girl that you heard her interview after she got out of the car, was with them. She was going to go sing. Most people don't know, but she has either 9 or 10 brothers and sisters. That entire family sings gospel music.
Right.
They're pretty talented. That's why she was there. In any case, they were told by the Grant County Sheriff that he would provide them safe harbor in Grant County, that he was a constitutional sheriff, and that they would be unharmed as long as they were in Grant County. So they went that night to attend this town hall meeting and speak with Chris Ann Hall. There were, again, more than 400 people at this town hall meeting, who then sat there and waited until they got the notification that there had been the blockade and the shooting of Lavoy Finicum.
Right.
We got notice yesterday in the email that there had been a kind of a town hall phone call on one of the radio shows that the Oath Keepers frequent, and that somehow the recording machine was, quote-unquote, accidentally not turned off after the town hall phone call, and that there was a private phone call recorded between Stuart Rhodes and Lavoy Finicum. The contents of that phone call were Stuart Rhodes urging Lavoy to stop the occupation of the refuge and move to a county in which there would be strong support from the county sheriff so that there was less peril as they spread their word, if you will. That was the night before they went to Grant County. They were approached by the Grant County Sheriff the next morning, who promised them safe harbor. How much that phone call had to do with the phone call from the Grant County Sheriff, I don't know. He turned out to have been an imposter. He had absolutely no intention of giving them safe harbor, and every intention of luring them up to John Day, where they would have to drive Highway 395 where they got caught in the blockade. So, there's a lot of suspicion surrounding this issue about who was working for who and who was on whose side, but the point was, we now know several people inside the militias were informants and working for the federal government. We know that the federal government ramped up what I wouldn't even call a small, but a medium-sized army to address maybe 40 people, and I believe that from the day this started, and Ammon Bundy's name was mentioned as one of these original men going to the refuge, they had every intention at that point of making this a bigger issue. Indictments started coming out of Nevada on that day. They weren't opened, but they were working with the grand jury. And they had a goal at the end of this, and one of those goals was to make sure that militia members were shown that we would not be tolerated. I think that was the shooting of Lavoy Finicum. Another goal was Cliven Bundy away from his cave in Nevada and out in the open and easily arrested. The other goal, obviously, were the new 68 indictments that have now been handed down out of Nevada 2 years after the Cliven Bundy standoff, regarding that standoff and a couple of others at the Sugar Pine mine and another mine in Montana. I think the federal government is very, very afraid of the U.S. citizen understanding, learning, knowing, and most importantly, requiring adherence to the U.S. Constitution, because that document takes away most of the power the federal government is currently wielding and gives it back to the states and to the people. And they don't want that, and they're willing to stop it at, as you've seen, almost any cost.
Well, it appears to me, Lory, when you look at this whole scenario, they're doing everything they can to step on, squash, eliminate anyone that is interested in applying the principles of the Constitution to their daily life, to their business, to their existence here in the United States of America. And what it is basically telling each and every one of us here is that if you people, all of us, not just you, I'm saying all of us in this country, if we don't stand up and demand that we be treated like citizens of this country, then you can expect to live the rest of your life, your children and your grandchildren, all generations to come, to live in a form of slavery that gets tougher and tougher as the days go by, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, we've already had ranchers in Harney County trying to go down the road where the refuge was, being taken out of their truck at gunpoint, put on their knees until they were identified to make sure they were going to feed cattle and not support the militia. I mean, is that America in any way, shape, or form?
Show me your papers.
Exactly. And we have that now in Burns, Oregon. And I realize people don't want to believe it, but it's there and it's real. There's pictures, there's videos. Just amazingly enough, people don't seem to be too upset.
And that I don't comprehend, ladies and gentlemen. Obviously, there is a good cause there. It's called your freedom to fight for. And if you don't stand up for it, pretty soon, and I'm talking yesterday, you will lose more and more of it with each passing moment, because that is the undercurrent. And it breaks my heart to say that. It honestly does. But the Statue of Liberty, I firmly believe, has a tear in her eye, and the American flag actually needs to be flying upside down at the moment because our country is in distress. Well, Lory, we've got a break coming at the top of the hour. Fox News is coming up, and I'm starting to question their fair and balanced line.
Yes.
I'll be very honest with you. ABC, I knew they were left to center, a whole gob and a bunch, as Derry Brownfield used to say. CBS, the same kind of thing. The old Mutual Broadcasting System, I don't know whether they even still exist. I like them the best of all. And then along came Fox News, and I made the switch there. I'll be real frank with you, and I'm not sure that I agree with their fair and balanced thing, because it appears to me, when you look at the ownership of even Fox News along with the other networks, they are bought and paid for, ladies and gentlemen, by someone other than a true American.
Well, we stopped with the phone conversation and the invitation from the Grant County Sheriff to the men at the refuge to come up and speak in Grant County. Obviously, that never happened, and events kind of spiraled out of control from there. And we can go through the shooting of Lavoy Finicum 1,000 times. I believe he was murdered, and I believe that that will be proven sometime in the future. I also believe that the arrest of the rest of them was, let's say, greatly enhanced its ease by the two traitors inside the convoy, Mark McConnell and Marvin Lee.
They did not get arrested.
Of course they didn't. They delivered the package as exactly as they were asked to do, and therefore the FBI upheld their end of the bargain. Because as long as you're working for the government, you're in good hands.
Right.
If you're working against them, you're obviously
not so much
a redneck terrorist, I guess. But the big point of this standoff in Burns, and the fact that it's over now, they got exactly what they wanted. They held out just long enough, the last 4 people in there, and believe me, I've worked with and know most of these people, and the last 4 people in that refuge were not militant militia members. How they were chosen, I don't know. And how they got left behind, I don't know. I think it was by choice. I believe David Fry was more than likely working for the FBI. As you said at the very beginning of the broadcast, I found his War of the Worlds live stream that night to be just a little over dramatic for my taste.
Yeah.
And I think it calmed down way too fast. And I can tell you that when you're listening to the live stream and things calm down after Michelle Fiore calls, what you hear is him speaking back and forth with FBI officers on the scene, joking about the fact that they're going to light the propane heater and they don't want anyone to shoot at them and think they're going to blow something up. And it was all very cordial, joking back and forth. The FBI officers were saying, well, we're warm in our truck. I can tell you Those were not the FBI officers that I ran into at the gate of the refuge, and they certainly weren't the FBI officers that the ranchers were running into on the way in and out of the refuge.
Right.
So there was something going on there. But the point is, they held out just long enough to get Cliven on a plane because he figured that there was going to be something that happened and result in more bloodshed. And they got him on the plane and they arrested him at the airport. There are now, as we said, 68 more warrants outstanding across 7 or 8 different states. The federal government right now is in the process of believing that they can jail and silence the vast majority of the militia members in the western states who have caused any of these things to happen or supported them in any way. And once they do that, they believe this will be over. And there will be no one else speaking out against the government and its literal tyrannical control and overreach.
Right.
And I fear they could be right. When you look at the arrest affidavits, you look at the indictments against these people, you'll see the page that says the United States of America versus Ammon Bundy. How does Ammon Bundy, a common citizen, fight the United States of America?
Well, they have all the time in the world and they have all the money in the world. All of the resources are in their corner.
They have cadres of full-time lawyers. They own the judges. This is a case exactly like the Hammonds, where the federal government is the arrestor, the judge, the jury, and the executioner. There is no way any private citizen gets any type of fair trial in that situation.
Due process does not exist anymore.
No, it doesn't. And if you don't believe me, just think of it this way. Put yourself in these shoes. You're arrested. You're in solitary confinement. You have access to a phone once a day, and it's a $15 collect call for 10 minutes. 4 or 5 of those minutes is the person you call trying to put in a debit card number fast enough to accept the call. Another minute or 2 is advertising from the company that's getting all the money from the $15 10-minute call. You get 4 or 5 minutes at the end. You have no access to a telephone book, no access to the internet, and you're supposed to, in that small cell with that 6-minute phone call every day, find your self-representation that you can trust.
Good luck with that one.
How do you even go about that?
Right.
And when you do find representation, how do you know you can trust them?
Right.
Most of these people in there now have court-appointed attorneys. And the vast majority of them are from the same law firm in Portland, Oregon.
I don't see how that can even be legal.
Well, a friend of mine who's a retired judge out there calls that the judicial railroad.
Really?
Yeah, the attorneys go and get their clients' stories. They go back to the office. They all talk about it, and they figure out which one they're going to roll over on the other one first in an attempt to plead them all out. There will never be an argument by these public defenders or these court-appointed attorneys made based on the Constitution. And here comes the second judicial railroad. This court would throw out the argument they're not guilty because the Constitution does not provide the federal government the control of land. I've been told by several attorneys, well, that argument won't be tolerated. Tolerated? What? The Constitution is the law of this land. What is so dangerous about that? And the reason the Constitution is only 7 pages long is because Jefferson and Washington and all of the rest of them believed if the common man could understand the law, it could never be used against him. And if the law of this land is 7 pages long, most common people can understand that. They can abide by that, live by that, and force their government to live by it. But we now have millions of pages of codified law, of regulation. There's thousands upon thousands of pages in every state. There's federal pages. Again, the Federal Register's taller than I am 3 or 4 times over. The common man can't understand that. He can't get through that. And now all law in these courtrooms is fought on the basis of precedent, not the Constitution, as though the federal government can simply take 25 years of precedent and mold the Constitution into whatever it deems it necessary to be. And that's exactly what's happened. I would like to simply put forth the defense, if the federal government has not the right to control this land, then what am I possibly guilty of? And I'd like to hear a judge say, well, the Constitution isn't the point here.
But, Lory, I'm here to tell you, even in the lower courts, and I'm talking the bottom of the barrel courts, and I don't mean anything nasty here. I just am telling you, even in your county court, in whatever county you live in, if you bring up the Constitution, the judge will tell you, we're not discussing that here, period.
Yeah.
They don't want the Constitution brought into a courtroom, and I don't care if it's at the county court level, let alone the district court level in Nebraska or South Dakota, and it's pretty much that way across the United States of America. Every now and then, you will run across a judge that is constitutional, but I'm here to tell you they are far and it's a long ways between the suckers. Let's all put it that way. There's just far and few between. I mean, I don't comprehend it. We know that it's not right. But what do you do about it? I want a solution here. Well, there is a solution, ladies and gentlemen, but it's going to get somebody shot. You know, when you start looking at this situation in Burns, Oregon, I know right now as we speak, Lory, as we're visiting this morning, there are a host of ranchers in Nevada, Utah, and Oregon that are extremely hot over this deal. Their blood is boiling. And there's some fellas that are loading up. I don't know what's to come. Is this a revolution in this country? I don't know.
Well, you can't fight a revolution with a handful of people, and it's like I said from the beginning. Whether this mission in Harney County was destined to fail from the beginning or not, whether it was the wrong hill to die on, and whether it was the wrong county because of their cowardly sheriff, there's still something that I said at the beginning of this that proves true yet today. If there had been 1,000 people at that refuge, Lavoy Finicum would be alive, and most of the rest of this would never have happened.
Right.
The problem is the apathy of most Americans. They won't go. They won't. You know, there are now going to be more than 80 people in some federal detention center somewhere losing their livelihoods.
Right.
Their lives, everything they own, probably trying to find a federal lawyer to defend them in federal charges. You now have Ammon Bundy and most of that group facing federal charges in 2 states.
You do, and what's going on even behind the scenes, and you talk about Ammon Bundy and the rest of them fighting these federal charges, but you have to look at what's happening to their families. Even Victoria Sharp, her home, this young girl's home, it's surrounded by FBI.
Surrounded by federal agents.
By federal agents. You take a look at Carol Bundy, which is Cliven's wife, her 2 bodyguards. The living H beat out of one of them, and the other one gets worked over too, but he doesn't get arrested. But they absolutely beat the living hell out of the one guy, and he's just trying to protect a woman.
A woman who now has both of her elder sons and husband in jail, and she's at the ranch by herself.
Yes.
Her son Melvin is there, but what does he have to look forward to?
Well, they're going to probably figure out some way to go after him too, and I'm hoping to have Brianna Bundy on the telephone with us here before the morning is over with.
I think what people need to take from this issue is, this is your federal government, folks. I don't care where you live. These are the people you will face if you ever decide to stand up and protect your private property rights. If you think this is not going to be you, you're living in an alternate reality. Those ranchers in Burns, Oregon that were hot should have been there. The ranchers in Nebraska who are hot about the things that are going on with their property should have been there. These things can't all come to your back door before you're going to have the chance to say no, and they are quashing. This FBI and this government is absolutely quashing anybody's ability to say, no, you will not treat us like slaves and subjects. You will not operate outside the Constitution while you attempt to force us to operate within it. It simply won't be that way.
And the funny thing about this all is, ladies and gentlemen, when I place a telephone call to the FBI wanting their comments, their side of the story, they are not willing to talk, period. Won't even return the call, to just hang up on you. Hang up on you.
Beth Ann Steele has been listed as the FBI contact for press for this little incident from the very beginning, and you and I have both called her several times and never received a response.
Never.
I had a conversation with a Fox News host out of Seattle that was at the memorial, the Lavoy Finicum Memorial, when we drove up the highway, and they were headed north, and I asked him, I said, where are you going? It's over now, right? The drama is over, so Fox News is going home? And he said, well, if you can get inside that refuge, you call me. So I called him 3 days later, and I said, I'm going in. I said, if they want to arrest or shoot me, they're going to have to do it in front of a TV camera if you have the nerve to follow me. but this is ridiculous that we're ramping up an army for 4 people when I can go in and talk to them.
Right.
He said, well, they'll never let you do that. And I said, did I give you any indication I was asking for permission?
Good for you.
And he said, no, but they'll never let you do it. Okay, so the free press in this country is dead.
Right.
Because that was the point of the press, was to question the government constantly so
Absolutely.
that it couldn't become a tyrant. And now Fox News needs permission to follow somebody in who's willing to risk their lives and go in. They're going to have permission before they do it.
Right.
Which is exactly why we're in the position we're in.
I would agree with that.
I did speak with the FBI on the scene, and I'd like to just thank you fellows for shining me on and acting like I was too stupid to add 2 and 2.
Do you think you were really talking with the FBI, Lory?
Who knows? He gave me the Harney County Task Force number. We now had, Joint Command Task Force for these 4 people, one of which is most important, beef in life was that they didn't legalize marijuana. Instead of dropping him a phone, they should have just dropped him a little bag of weed and let him calm down. Probably would have come out by himself. The entire ramp up of this military force was just, that's what I'm trying to get across to people. It was ridiculous for what this was.
One of the most important things, and I'm going to interject something here, Lory, but one of the most important things that you listeners can do out there are elections coming up, and there will be elections in the future. There will be men, possibly women, running for the job of county sheriff in your county. And if you don't hold their feet to the fire extremely hard before you ever vote for them, you may end up with a sheriff like they have in Harney County. Now, he was an appointed BLM member, appointed to be county sheriff, so we already know where his allegiance was. But the county sheriff's allegiance is supposed to be to the people of his county. And if the men or women that are running for office in your county, if they don't want to stand up and kick the federal government out when there's overreach, then don't vote for the people.
And I hate to say this because there's someone within proximity that can smack me on the head, but I'd even maintain that the only election coming up that matters in your county is county sheriff. I don't know how many more times the Republicans need to prove to you that they have no intention of stopping this runaway government, but we vote. Record elections for the Republicans. Nothing changes. The direction in this country is going to be changed with you locally and a strong county sheriff. Really, honestly, is our only option.
Lory, I would agree with that 100% here this morning, and we're hoping that we have Brianna Bundy on the telephone line with us somewhere along the line before our broadcast is over with here. We are visiting with Lory Storm this morning. Lory has a little better insight, obviously, into the situation in Burns, Oregon, having been there 3 different times to report for the Twister. Lory, let's carry on.
Well, we left off with the election of these sheriffs, and once again, I just can't stress how important that is. This issue in Burns could have gone so differently if the sheriff in that county had been at all interested in either protecting or upholding the Constitution, an oath I'm pretty sure he swore when he was elected, or in protecting the citizens of Burns, Oregon, other than those who work for the BLM.
Lory, and it's not that I don't agree with your statement 100%, but I also say to myself, when I look at the big picture of this, I say to myself, okay, patriots, you went to a location that you say, yes, is not constitutional, and you took over the facility. Now, obviously, Lory, there's a right and a wrong here, and a law was broken there. It wasn't their building, even though they say that it was their building. So help me understand this here. Couldn't have they went to the local city hall, rented it, and done the same thing rather than go take over a refuge?
Well, the point wasn't to take over the refuge.
I understand.
The point was to find the records and the ranchers who are neighbors of the refuge who have had their land taken from them by the BLM. And remember, there were documents found. I think there's even several phone calls that were recorded that prove that the BLM was doing everything it could do to take ranches by force.
Correct.
So,
and obviously, they're not going to give up that information. Even if you went to court somewhere along the line, they would figure out a way to either eliminate the information, or it would be drug out for so many years that we might be into the next century before answers ever came out, if they ever came out.
Or they'll simply ignore you. The Haggies have had a $40 million judgment accruing interest against the BLM for, what is it now, 20 years?
Right.
And they've not paid 1 cent. They've not even made an attempt to pay 1 cent. They've simply ignored it. Now, if the Haggies, let's just talk about the Hammonds. They had a $400,000 judgment against them in favor of the BLM. Do you think they got away with not paying that or ignoring it? No way. So my point is, we are no longer governed, we are ruled, and we will either accept it or we won't. The point of being at that wildlife refuge is, first of all, it's not used in the winter. Second of all, it wasn't being very well maintained by the federal government. And third, what do you propose we do if every attempt we have to redress our government of grievances is ignored? Eventually, the government leaves people no choice other than to force them to be reckoned with.
Sure.
And that's where we are. And if you will remember, and this is not a quote, I'm paraphrasing, Thomas Jefferson said he loved the act of defying one's government and hoped that it remained alive. He said that it was better it be afforded too often than not often enough, because our government needed to be consistently reminded that the liberty fell with the people.
It does. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about that a little bit, and I want to take you back to Ferguson, Missouri, and some of those different instances that we're all aware of. Now, the people that had the time to protest, to march, were people literally on welfare. You say, why didn't this same thing happen in Burns, Oregon? Well, let's put it this way. Those fellas are working for a living. They're trying to feed their families. They're trying to be honest, tax-paying citizens, and they are punished for that. Where, how do you bring attention to the particular situation like they did in Ferguson and so forth? You loot, you riot, you march, you holler, you scream. But those people had the time to holler and scream, to march, and to raise holy H. But the people that are actually trying to live by the law of the land, but want some changes made so that we actually follow the true law of the land, those people are penalized. What's wrong with this scenario, people?
Well, exactly. I mean, you look at the outcome of either Ferguson or Baltimore. There were hundreds of thousands of dollars in damage done to public buildings, police cars. In Ferguson, they basically burnt down and looted their own neighborhoods.
Yeah, not too bright.
And no charges, no arrests, no shootings, even though they were threatening physical violence against police officers in person, surrounding them and threatening to kill them. If you remember, several of the officers were escorted from the area after having been threatened by large gangs. The people at the Malheur Refuge did none of those things.
Right.
They threatened no one. They simply drew the line and said, we will defend ourselves. And that's what inflamed the federal government. The government's answer was, the hell you will.
Right.
You'll do as we say.
Well, I think we all saw the federal government at its finest in action back at the Bundy Ranch, when you had the BLM guy, the devil himself, on one side of the fence and common citizens on the other. You saw the government's attitude. That man was absolutely inflamed, and there had to be little horns.
And you also saw the, whatever it was, the tool used on their side to bang on those panels. You saw them try and draw fire.
Yes.
Purposefully trying to get us to shoot them. That is the federal government. And again, if people don't think it's coming here, they're wrong. It's already here. It's here on the banks of the Niobrara already in fine fashion, and it's growing. It's on the South Dakota Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. They're taking land from them again. It will be at both ends of the Niobrara before we're done. It is on the Pine Ridge where the bighorn sheep are.
Right. You know, Lory, there's been, I think you have the information in front of you, but there has been news releases here in just in the last, matter of hours, literally, of additional taking of land in the United States by the federal government.
As soon as the night after Cliven was arrested, there's a big press release from the USDA talking about how Secretary Jewell and Secretary Vilsack are applauding President Obama's action to sign into designation 3 new national parks, new national monuments. We haven't had a monument in this country until Obama that covered more than about 4 acres. This is 1.8 million acres of monument in California.
Unreal.
Just signed into law, the swipe of a pen by one man. The federal government has no authority to manage any land, but it's now managing another 2 million acres. It will, of course, probably follow the same lines as it does with every other monument. Right now it says you can still ride your ATV and you can still ride your horse. But how long has that been the truth in other monuments? I can name several in Utah that have just recently banned all motor vehicle travel. Some of them have banned horses on trails. A couple of these designations are now wilderness areas, which means there will be no motorized travel,
Right.
no travel of large groups. And let me tell you what else it means. It means there will be no firefighting. On wilderness areas, fires cannot be fought with mechanized equipment. So when the fires come rolling out of those wilderness areas and hit neighboring lands, be they private or public, they have a voracious appetite because they have not been slowed down at all.
Let me ask you, and this is probably looking over the fence too far, but once you have an area the size that these different areas are, and there's no one watching, who knows what else the government is doing at those locations?
Well, I'll tell you one thing they're doing. They just took away, and what I would say to the Oglala Sioux tribe up at the Pine Ridge is you better call the Apache tribe in Arizona and New Mexico, because they just took a huge chunk of their land and gave it to a foreign mining corporation in order to allow them to mine.
And you have to say to yourself, or I have to ask the question, why do we have to bring a foreign mining company in to this country to mine anywhere, whether it's on private or public land? Why do we have a foreign mining company coming in? It makes no sense.
Oh, it makes perfect sense. As long as Americans are broke and can't fight the federal government, they're much better subjects, much easier to contain and control. And, we're talking about this state land and this federal land they're grabbing, and people say that it's not happening here on a large scale, but there are too many people signing these conservation easements that are perpetual, and at least 70% of this land across the country ends up in the control of the federal government.
You know, Lory, you and I have dealt with these conservation easements before in past programs, and I think that was probably a couple of years ago now, and there have been numerous people in our coverage area here that have signed on to these conservation easements. You people don't know how dangerous that is. And yes, I understand. Somebody's going to write you a nice check, and we're all working because we'd like to have a little more money in our pocket. But people, you better read the fine print and understand the undercurrent that is going on there.
Well, and you also have to remember that right here next to home, close to home in Colorado, 5 ranchers lost their entire property, their entire ranch. They had signed conservation easements. The government would not provide its part of the easement for them. It did not allow them to graze where they said that they would allow them to graze, and it shut them off of water that they agreed they could use in the beginning. So these ranchers defied the order because they had no choice but to water their cattle, and 7 or 8 years into the easement, the enforcement arm of the easement comes along, and that is none other than the IRS. And they say, you have defied the terms of your easement. You now owe us more than $1.2 million in back taxes, penalties, and fees because you were given a tax break on your property.
Ooh la la. Now, I wasn't aware of that. Now, that's even... Gee, Jim, there's some things you can't say on the radio, but I hope you folks understood what Lory was just telling you there. You might get a big check in the beginning stages, but they're going to get it back from you before it's done with.
Well, and if there wasn't a reason for these conservation easements, the government wouldn't be pressing so hard to get them signed. New email this morning. The USDA and its partners are going to invest $720 million in large-scale targeted conservation projects.
I think I have a printout of 22 or 24 pages over there saying basically the same thing, and that's happening right here in Nebraska.
It is happening right here in Nebraska,
Yeah.
and if it wasn't lucrative for the federal government in the end, they wouldn't be doing it.
Right.
Again, most of these lands end up with the federal government. And that's just a fact of the conservation easement.
Lory, what I'd like to do, and maybe you have a direction you want to go here, but we have about 20 minutes before the top of the hour. I'd like to take a break and see if we can get Brianna Bundy on the line, if that's all, if you have the time for that yourself.
No, let's do that.
This morning on the telephone line with us, we have Brianna Bundy, and we'd like to welcome her to the airwaves. Good morning, Brianna.
Yeah, sorry about that.
That's all right. Brianna, thank you so much for joining us this morning on the airwaves of the Twister. And Brianna, there have been a lot of things happen here in the past 24 hours and over the last 30 or 40 days. But if you would, Brianna, I want to just turn things over to you this morning. Obviously, you have a message I think that you would like to pass along to the listeners. Give us your take on what has transpired here with the arrest of your father-in-law and the whole situation that has transpired in Burns.
Well, I think it's about time for America to wake up and realize that our rights are diminishing right before our eyes. I mean, it was one thing to take away water rights and grazing rights and, you know, just everyday rights that people have in their communities, but it's a complete different thing when they start taking away your First Amendment rights. I mean, everybody knows we've been facing Second Amendment violations over and over again, but even, I mean, why do you think that is? They're taking away our Second Amendment rights, so we don't have a way to protect our First Amendment rights. And now if you're speaking out and promoting the Constitution and promoting education and promoting knowledge of our rights, then they'll just imprison you. They will beat you down in parking lots. They will surround your house with your family inside, and they will storm in and they will haul you off to prison. And as we know, they will even shoot to kill you.
Well, that is just, it's very true what you're telling us here. And I think when you look at the whole big picture here, Brianna, it appears to me, Lory and I were visiting about this a little bit, but it appears plain and simple that the government is very, very, very afraid that the movement, if you will, the concept of getting the information out to the public, if this happens to take widespread, if it gets traction, if you will, they know that they're in big trouble and they don't want this to happen. And I think that's one of the reasons for possibly all of these arrest warrants, if you will. And I would venture to say, Brianna, even you and your husband probably are in jeopardy.
Oh, I'm sure we are, but we don't really care. You know, it's a sad thing when our government becomes so out of control that they don't need probable cause or justification to arrest somebody or kill somebody. They can create charges the night before that they plan on coming to get you, and they can go back as far in your life as they want to try to, I don't know, I guess, allow these charges to go forward. I mean, there's no rights at all for we the people, and people need to start seeing that. And they don't see that our federal government has become so out of control and so tyrannical that they have become so threatened by the people who speak out and speak of the Constitution and our rights. They'll just come get you. And I tell them, come and get me, because I'm not going to silence myself. I'm not scared of them. And if I lose my life or I end up in prison, so be it.
Well, Brianna, I appreciate what you're saying. I value your courage. I want to ask you another question, if I might. As we look at what has gone on, we know that Cliven obviously has been incarcerated. It's my understanding that his wife's bodyguards have run into problems with the feds. It's my understanding that Victoria Sharp's house is surrounded by the feds. Is that a true story?
Two of our bodyguards, Skipper, who's been there over the last few weeks, him and another man went up to Walmart just to get some groceries and stuff, and they got beat up in the parking lot and drug around and put in the back of unmarked vehicles and hauled around town and taken to a hotel and switched vehicles and put them in other vehicles and interrogated them for hours, wanting to know what their relationship is with the Bundys, how long they've been there, were they here in 2014, were they at the refuge, how many people are at the ranch, how many people are coming. I mean, they're very, and they ask these questions like it even matters. They know how many people's down there, and they know who would come.
Well, I would
But
think
they're
so.
just trying to scare us and trying to get us to leave our home because it's not safe there. And they've taken our boys, they've taken our dad, and we're not losing our house too. We will stand and fight. They're not going to get our ranch. We will fight until the end.
Brianna, what do the other ranchers in your local area there? What kind of a sense of feeling do you have from others?
There aren't any.
Yeah, we don't have any ranchers left down here. They've cleaned them all out already. Cliven's the only one for about probably close to 200 miles.
Well, for crying out loud. So there's really nobody in your corner on that end of the road at all, is what you're telling
and,
me.
I've called our congressman, we've called our sheriff, we've called our representatives, and they just claim that they don't know anything more than we do. They're just trying to find out themselves. But really that was them saying, we have no intention of getting involved.
Well, it sounds like Jay was arrested by the mob. Is what it sounds like.
Yeah.
I mean, this sounds like the mob dragging people around in cars and taking them to hotels. It sounds like,
They didn't read up their rights or anything. And so Skipper refused to talk because he's like, I'm going to have to answer that. I'm not going to answer that.
Well, you
I
don't
know
have
my
any rights.
And you didn't read them to me. And so you can sit here and pull off my toenails one by one, and I'm not going to talk.
Well, you don't have any rights with the federal government, Brianna. You know that.
Oh, absolutely. We don't have any, even in our local communities and our state courts and everything else. We don't have any rights as American people. And if people think, oh, they'll go to court and things will sort themselves out, and let's just hope for the best. No, there's no hope. Our court systems are just as corrupt. They don't allow you to exercise your rights in them because they have been proven guilty. And I'm sorry, but maybe I'm naive, but I thought that it was innocence until proven guilty.
Well, it is,
But
as long
it's
as
completely opposite.
it is innocent until proven guilty, so long as you haven't gone after the federal government.
Right, because now you become a thorn in their side.
Well, they label you as a terrorist of some kind, and at that point in time, all of the rules of the game change, and all of the rules are strictly in their favor, not in yours at all.
Oh, absolutely. We were talking about it. I'm like, wow, maybe we should just go hold somebody hostage, like, I don't know, Hillary Clinton or something, and then they would let our men out of jail just like they did with all of those terrorists over with Bergdahl.
I'm not sure they'd want her back.
Well, yeah, that's what we were laughing
Yeah,
about.
you need to find somebody better than her.
Yeah, right. We were laughing about that. We said that same thing. I don't think that they would negotiate with us because they'd probably be happy we took her. You know what I mean, though? But that's what they do. I mean, they're making deals with the devil in order to set despicable men loose to, reign with horror on this earth. And then, just people that are fighting to protect other people are being incarcerated. And as far as Cliven goes, Cliven was going over to Portland to meet with Ammon and Ryan. He needed to talk to them and their attorneys and find out if they were well because he hasn't had an opportunity to speak with them.
Right.
And that's a crime to go see your boys in jail. I mean, enough to be surrounded. I mean, Cliven's been traveling around for the last 2 years, free as the day he was born, to, go to his speaking engagements and fly to visit family or fly to different conferences. Never once have they even attempted at arresting him.
Well, you have to ask yourself the question when he got to Portland, which is probably one of the more liberal areas of the United States. Nothing against you, Oregon people, I don't mean that, but when it comes to your judicial system in your state, it leaves a lot to be desired. But obviously, there's a real reason that they waited for him to get to Portland.
Well, I think they just knew that he wasn't coming with anybody, that he was coming by himself, obviously because of the safety of his family. I mean, they have half of them already. He wasn't going to allow any of us to go with them, too. But he really needed to go see his boys, and, you know.
Sure.
So they knew that he was coming. They knew that he'd missed his flight from the people that were supposed to be traveling with him. And they knew they missed his flight because they let the TSA hold him up long enough that he would. And then they surrounded him by a SWAT team and FBI and U.S. Marshals and everything else. Like, this is a 69-year-old man.
Yeah, he looks pretty dangerous.
Yeah, right?
Well, and you know he's
blood
unarmed.
pressure medication, and, you know, he's not moving as quick as he used to be.
Well, and obviously they knew the man was unarmed. You know, if you're going to be on an airplane, you're going to be unarmed.
Well, that's one of the bogus things about those charges. Like, one of them was, like, them saying, I don't know, there was some weapons charges that he was charged with. I can't remember the exact way they name it. But if anybody that has known Cliven, and these guys know him, they've been monitoring him for so long, they know that Cliven Bundy, first of all, does not even have a functioning firearm. And
Really?
even at that, he doesn't even carry one. And he's never carried one because he knows that's just justification for them to shoot him. If he's packing a gun around, they could just shoot him and say, oh, well, he drew on it.
Right.
So he's been very aware of that for a number of years and doesn't even carry one. He has an old rusted-out 22 because he never oils it, and he leaves it under the swamp cooler, and so it's all rusted out. I'd be surprised if the thing would even fire.
I've seen that gun. I think you're right.
Yeah.
He could throw it at him, though.
Right?
It's pretty heavy.
Bloodthirsty criminal.
Well, Brianna, we're starting to, time is starting to constrain us here. I'm going to give you here about 60 seconds to kind of wrap things up, young lady.
Okay. All I can say is, American people, get out your Constitution, get out your Bill of Rights, get out the Declaration of Independence, get out your Bible, and get to reading. Get to studying and know your rights. If you have to write them down and hang them on your bathroom mirror and do a rundown of them every morning, know what your rights are. The most dangerous thing to this government is knowledge. You know what you stand to lose, and so you'll be willing to stand and fight for it.
Well said, Brianna, and I thank you so much for joining us this morning. Lory wants to visit with you briefly.
Just one quick message.
Okay.
If they come for that ranch, you call me. Do you hear me, feds? I'll go.
Oh, yeah, we'll call.
Brianna, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Our best to you and your family.
Hey, I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Twister listeners, thank you so very much for joining us this morning on KSDZ and KDJL Radio. And a very special thank you going out to Brianna Bundy for joining us this morning on the airwaves. Lory has a number of different things that she wants to visit with you about this morning. We're starting to be constrained by time. We're about 2 minutes away from the top of the hour and Fox News this morning. Lory, we have just a couple of minutes here, or about 1 minute and 50 seconds. You want to give us some kind of a take on Brianna's conversation and give us an idea what you're going to visit about in the next hour.
Sorry, I was reading some news that came in.
I see that.
I can't read and talk at the same time. I'm only so intelligent. I can pull the trigger and talk, or pull the trigger and read, just so anybody's wondering, but I can't read and talk at the same time. Sorry.
Well, I just am curious. I mean, I enjoyed Brianna taking, and appreciate Brianna taking a little time out to visit with us here. And to be real frank with you, she didn't share anything with us that the rest of us, I think almost everyone in our listening audience, would agree with what this young woman had to say. This mother, and what does she have, 5 or 6 babies at home?
Well, she has 6, and I think the 6th, I'm pretty sure it's 6, and the youngest one is 7 weeks or so. I mean, pretty young. She couldn't go to Oregon because the baby was young enough that, it's still relying on mama pretty much solely. So, I think she's exactly right. The biggest danger to this federal government is knowledge. If people understand they actually do have rights and they are sovereign over the government, It's very dangerous for our government. Very dangerous.
Yes, it is. And if you have time on the internet, you go search out Chris Ann Hall. Isn't that the constitutional lady from down in Florida?
We will be hosting Chris Ann Hall up here shortly. I'll give you some details when we get back.
Good. I'm delighted to hear that. A very intelligent woman. She is very animated, if you will, and of course her knowledge base is extreme. You will enjoy and you will learn a lot from this woman, ladies and gentlemen. Visiting with Lory Storm this morning. Lory has been to Burns 3 different times reporting for the Twister. Brianna Bundy joined us last hour. And Lory, we have received this morning a couple of faxes and some texts that have come in. And I think possibly people are missing the point to a certain degree, or maybe we're not getting the message out as clearly as we should be.
Well, yeah, let's just address these one at a time, if we could. We got a text or a fax from someone who was asking us to compare the events in Ferguson, Missouri, or say Baltimore, Maryland, with the refuge, and I think we did that.
We did that.
But I think that the distinction here is this: the opinion of this was that those crimes in Ferguson and Baltimore were carried out by minorities, and it was the white people that occupied the refuge. And I would counter with this. If a whole bunch of redneck ranchers would have been really mad and gone out there and wrecked the refuge, they might have been arrested. There wouldn't have been any FBI. Probably wouldn't have been, a town on lockdown or under siege. And maybe they would have been charged with vandalism. Maybe not. Who knows? Trust me, I understand the distinction. But my point here is what made the people at the refuge so dangerous is that they were educating their fellow citizen. The only thing the people in Ferguson were doing is seeing how much crap they could carry home out of the local 7-Eleven when they looted it.
Yeah, really. But again, you addressed it just now, and I believe we addressed that before. There was a gentleman, I think out of Shadman here, that converses with the radio station quite often, and I appreciate that very much. He brings some different points of interest to light. And the point of interest that he has brought today, actually, I think he had faxed that to me some time ago, one very similar to this, and I'd like to have you address that, Lory.
Well, basically what he's saying is that there's a difference in these government agencies that are underneath the umbrella of the USDA and the Department of the Interior. And he was stressing that Clive and Bundy's issues were with the BLM, but the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge is controlled by the Fish and Wildlife Service. Well, I don't think the Fish and Wildlife Service knows that because the sign at the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge says BLM, and all of the employees who work there are BLM employees. So I don't think that there's a huge distinction.
Well, the BLM, and I'm going to ask because I don't know, but isn't the BLM, I don't know about USDA, but somebody's under the control of the Department of Interior. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and I don't think that, and that's what I'm saying, I don't think that any of these distinctions within the federal government really matter. I think that the only reason the federal government has these separate distinctions is for budgetary purposes. So we can't see what we spend every year on actually maintaining and controlling land, whether it's fish and wildlife, whether it's USDA and the Farm Service bill. If you lump all these budgets together, it's bigger than the defense budget by far.
Yes.
But separate, they look like innocuous entities, and they look like maybe they're doing the job they're supposed to be doing for the money that they get. So I'm not sure that as far as the government's concerned, the distinction means anything other than budgetary process issues. The sign at Malheur does say BLM.
Okay.
And it is the BLM that prosecuted the Hammonds, and it is the BLM that has the first right of refusal on their ranch, and it is the BLM that wants that ranch to continue that water flow, fresh water flow that goes in to the Malheur Refuge. That's why they have fenced them off of that land.
Well, obviously, when you look at Oregon, you have a governor there. Then you start looking at the federal government. You have Lynch's minions, if you will, or attorney general. And don't kid yourself, folks, that your boy King was not aware of what was going on, and everybody working together calling some shots in the background here.
Well, and let's just talk about how many shots they were calling in the background. I don't know if we've talked about this yet, but if you look up Mr. Brightsing, who is the FBI man who is in charge of this entire thing in Portland, Oregon, he was just recently transferred from Salt Lake City after being under investigation by a local news crew for doing all kinds of untoward things with classified information.
He was kind of a scumbag.
He was a scumbag. He was giving out FBI credentials to people who weren't supposed to have them. And one of the most interesting things he did is a friend of his who is a contractor working for the FBI, Lord only knows what that means, he gave him his credentials, and they had no expiration date, and they also had no restrictions. So this man had 24-hour access to any place inside FBI headquarters in Salt Lake City he wanted to go, and it never shut off.
So what you're telling me here, and I'm kind of reading between the lines, and I don't know that I'm reading this right, he gets himself his woohoo in a ringer in Salt Lake City, and it's like, you're about to lose your job. We'll give you a little chance to redeem yourself and maybe keep your pension. You go handle this mess in Oregon. Would that be right?
I think it was deeper than that.
Really?
Here's what I believe. Lavoy Finicum was shot while unarmed.
Right.
Everyone who left that refuge with him knew he was unarmed. As a matter of fact, if you listened closely the other night to the live streaming, the one thing of any value that may have come out of that was that they claimed to have Lavoy's guns with them. So everyone knows he left that refuge unarmed. They planted a stolen 9mm on him, and I believe if that mention hadn't been made the other night that 9mm might have turned into one of Lavoy's guns in the evidence locker. I don't know. But the point here is, this guy's looking at losing his job and his pension. It's nothing for him to have a stolen gun planted on Lavoy and then quietly retire with his full pension, much like Lois Lerner.
Yes.
Who defies every law in the books, is a known felon, and then retires quietly on a 6-figure income and a gold-plated health care fund that the American people she targeted pay for each and every day.
Frightening.
More so than frightening. I told an attorney in Portland that story about Brightsing, and he said, oh, so they moved the cleaner up here.
The cleaner?
Yeah, the cleaner. He cleans up the little issues that need to be cleaned up, like the weapon that was found on Lavoy and those kinds of things.
And that's what they're calling him, the cleaner.
I just told the attorney the story. I just read him the story from the Salt Lake Journal about the investigation, and that was the first thing that came out of his mouth. So I don't think there's a whole lot of, doubt about why it was Portland he was moved to and put in charge of that particular situation. He is literally at the behest of whoever controls him, even much more so than just a regular employee.
Well, I would venture to say that somewhere up the chain of command that Lynch is involved in the whole scenario also. Lory, you were talking about some of the, what do I want to say, some of the infractions, if you will, some of the wrongdoing involved even with the man that was the head of the FBI that was handling this thing in Burns, Oregon. There's more going on behind the scenes, I think, than meets our eye, or that we probably will ever know if the truth be known. But there's even more skullduggery as you begin to look into some of the people involved on the government side of the equation.
Sure there is. Long before the occupation of the refuge, the federal prosecutor in Portland, who was in charge of the prosecution of the Hammonds, the one responsible for going back to the Ninth Circuit and appealing their sentences and getting them thrown back into prison, was accused of stalking one of her younger legal aides to the point that he filed complaints. To me, a federal prosecutor should be someone who, number one, is an adult, and number two, probably abides by the law. If she's out there enough that she's stalking a younger cohort after having an affair, maybe she's not a person that, has the character required to testify against people like the Hammonds.
You bring up a valid point there. But again, those are things that the public, by and large, in our corner of the world, obviously would not be aware of.
Right, and they're things that, the press keeps nice and quiet there in Oregon so that it doesn't spread. But at the end of the day, the point here is this. The federal government is going to force us all to our knees at the point of a gun eventually. It's happened in Oregon.
Well, obviously it has, but at some point, Lory, somebody's going to turn around and point their gun back at them, and the hammer is going to go down. It's coming. I'm afraid. I hope not, but it's coming. The public's only going to stand about so much of this.
Yeah, I've been hearing that for 5 years, though, and I've seen people draw the line 1,000 times. Well, if that happens, it'll be over, and then that happens, and it goes by, and nobody does anything, and you see the next one. Well, if that happens, it's over.
Well, nobody wants to die, but they're going to run across the wrong group of people at some point here.
Well, they just did, and they killed one of them.
Yes.
But I think that group of people is quickly on their way to jail as they serve these criminal warrants today. I've just gotten notice that there may be 38 more coming down the pike. So their goal and their intention to silence those people who would speak out and try and educate people on the fact that they do have rights in this country and that the Constitution is the law of this land, regardless of legal precedents. They're going to try and shut down that movement that tries to educate people as to what their rights really are, because that, again, is very dangerous for the federal government.
Well, the world, if you will, has spent so much time in dumbing down its population. And I'm going to talk about sports here. I'm going to talk about television. I'm going to talk about your smartphones. There are so many gadgets for you to fiddle with, and the millennials and the metrosexuals, they absolutely love to fiddle with gadgets, but they're not paying attention to what's going on around them. And I can't totally blame them, because even the baby boomers, many of them, as we look at, all of the different demographics in the United States, everybody is so busy either trying to make a living or suck the government's tit that they're not paying attention to what the government is really doing to them.
That, or
And
they're
now,
busy trying to change their demographics.
Yeah, and and so all of a sudden when you have someone that says, okay, look at these documents, study them, understand them, apply them to your life and to your government, the government's going, whoa, we've spent billions of dollars to try and dumb you down. We don't want you to know this stuff. And so those of you that have learned it, we're going to give you a little time in the Crowbar Hotel to change your attitude.
Exactly, and we're going to kill one of you just to let you know we're very serious about the fact that that kind of knowledge, as the man said in Tombstone, that don't go around here. Law don't go around here, law dog.
There you go. There you go. Well, we laugh about it, but it's not a laughing matter at all, ladies and gentlemen. It is very, very serious. Lory, as we look down the road here, all of a sudden they have the situation in Burns, Oregon. I have no idea what's going on there today, if you will, but obviously there's nobody left at the refuge as far as the Patriot faction is concerned. Everybody's pretty much incarcerated now. Do you have any sense, Lory, as to when these kinds of things will actually ever get straightened out, or will they ever be straightened out?
Well, if you're talking about those who are still in jail in their trials, these federal trials can take 4 or 5 years just to get into court, and it can take hundreds of thousands of dollars to get there that these kids don't have.
Right.
It's also a big question as to whether or not they'll ever see the light of day in that period of time.
Well, now when you say the light of day, I got a little problem here. All of a sudden the judge out there says once the deal at the refuge is over and done with, then she's going to provide bail or offer bail for those that are incarcerated, Ammon Bundy as well as the others that were initially arrested. We'll see if she sticks by her word here.
Actually, she never said that. She offered Shauna Cox bail if Shauna could end the siege at the refuge. The rest of them have been deemed too dangerous to be turned loose. In fact, the federal judge has deemed them so dangerous they're not allowed to go to their own hearings. And let me tell you something else.
The attorneys are putting up with that malarkey?
They're public defenders.
Okay.
Yeah.
Enough said.
Cliven went to his hearing, if you can imagine this, and no offense, Brianna, but I think your father-in-law's 74, not 69. I'm just saying. I think he's 74. I think Cliven's 74 years old. But he went to his hearing the other day in shackles on his ankles and his arms, shackled. As though he's some kind of a ninja undercover FBI warrior, and unshackled he's going to take out everyone in the courtroom and run to his ranch.
Well, and if the truth be known, the 40-yard dash would probably cause him a heart attack.
Yeah, I'm not sure he'd make it to the end of 40. I think the 10-yard dash might cause Cliven a heart attack. He's used to his horses making those dashes for him.
There you go. I can appreciate that. Well, I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but it sure has disrupted a host of lives. But it's made an awful lot of FBI people a lot of money.
Oh, the overtime out there is astonishing, and the amount of equipment they're buying with the money they extort from us is also astonishing. I do want to say before we wrap up here that we are setting up 2 different pages on freenebraska.org. We will be connecting directly to the legal funds of both the defendants and Lavoy Finicum. Randy is busy getting that set up so that there are different pages. Just please, in the memo line, either put defendants or Finicums, and it will link directly with those legal funds, so that we can hopefully help these people as much as we can now. Obviously, going to Oregon is of no more value at this point, but the Lavoy Finicum family filing a wrongful death suit, I believe in the end that they will win that suit. What good it does them to get a judgment against the federal government, I don't know, but I will volunteer to be the collection officer.
There you go.
If they do.
Lory, as we start to wrap this thing up, any closing comments that you want to make here? And then we're going to make the switch back to real country music listeners. But
No, I would just encourage people. We are going to be hosting Chris Ann Hall. When I have dates, Jim will be the first to know, and it will be on the website, freenebraska.org. We will also be offering some things for sale for the first time ever. Lavoy Finicum, I don't know how many people know this, wrote a novel, and it was actually a great novel. And it shows very clearly how much this man understood about where our country is and where we're headed. We're going to be hopefully talking the publisher into another run of that. We'll have that on the website. Cliven Bundy has a book about his life, written by Shauna Cox, about it's called Last Rancher Standing. He is indeed the last rancher in Clark County, Nevada. And we will also have a third book written by the senior Mr. Hagee, who documents his lifelong battle with the BLM. Those three will be available on our website. All of the proceeds will be split between those two legal funds. And we will also be selling, as of hopefully the beginning of March, the Lavoy Finicum Blue Tarp flag, which you can fly underneath your upside-down U.S. flag to let the federal government know that we will not forget and not be silenced.
good enough. And listeners, if you took nothing else away from our program here this morning, I hope you sincerely understand how important it is when it comes to electing a county sheriff in your county, regardless of where you live in our coverage area, in our state, in our neighboring state, South Dakota, as well as our neighboring state of Wyoming. When you elect a county sheriff, hold their feet to the fire, know a lot about them before you ever cast your ballot. And I would suggest that you people here in the 43rd Legislative District do the very same thing. We did not look, I repeat, we did not look deep enough into the horse's mouth the last time.
Some of us did. I try to warn you.
Well, I had the man set right where you sat and visited with him, and I didn't realize till after the fact that I was not hearing the truth. But again, folks, you've got to know about these political candidates and know a lot about them before you cast your ballot. With that being said, thank you so much for joining us for our special public affairs presentation this morning on KSDZ and KDJL Radio. We're going to be back with real country music for you here on the Twister. Stay with us. And Lory, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it, young lady.
Thank you.
Okay, that was awesome interview. Lory Storm is awesome. I am at freenebraska.org right now. We'll look around at that website, but I have a message from someone. Just want to read it to you. It's not confirmed, but I think it's very important, and they wanted me to get this out to you. Again, I could not confirm it, but this information is coming from a very good source. You should know that the feds are in Nevada rounding up Cliven's cattle and told Brianna the ranch was next. We need to let people know, although there are so few of us left. I don't know what we'll do about it. That message was given to me a little while ago. I'll read it again. You should know that the feds are in Nevada and rounded up Cliven's cattle and told Brianna the ranch was next. We need to let people know. Although there are so few of us left, I don't know what we'll do about it. So again, that is from a very good source, but it is unconfirmed. I looked all over, could not confirm it anywhere. Here we are at freenebraska.org. I'm going to leave the link below. It looks like someone spent a good amount of time on it. Anyway, this is Call of Duty Goddess signing off, and as always, I've got your six.